Okay, hello everyone and welcome, welcome to everyone coming into the Zoom session. Welcome to the people who are tuning in on Facebook Live. Great to have you with us for today's info session focused on the Starting an Intentional Community online course. And we're here with Jana Ludwig, who is the course instructor. And the intention for this session is to share all about the course, find out more from Jana about what she'll be covering, and hopefully provide some useful guidance for you all who are considering taking the course so you can know whether or not it's a good fit for you. And my name is Cynthia. I'm calling in from Vermont, where I live in an eco-village called Headwaters Community, a small eco-village in central Vermont. So I'm gonna kick things off by sharing my screen. I have a quick presentation to run through, and then we will go over to Q&A time with Jana. So once again, if you're just coming in, this is the info session with Jana Ludwig for the 5-week online course, Starting an Intentional Community. And it's actually our second time running this course in this particular format. So it's really awesome that we get to run it again, because the course last time was so popular. It fills up quickly, and that group had an incredible experience really being the first people to take the course in this format. And so now we're going to do it again, probably with also some improvements from the last time. So I'm excited to be able to share this with all of you. And we'd like to offer you a discount for joining this info session or signing up to get the recording. If you registered for the info session and got the Zoom link to attend, we'll also be sending you via email a unique discount code, which will give you 30% off the full price of the course, which is $299. So 30% off that price. And more information about the course, as well as the scholarship application, is available at ic.org/starting-course. And really encourage you, if you're unsure if you can afford the course or not, to apply for a scholarship. It's a big part of our mission as an organization to make all of our courses very accessible. So encourage you to do that if you choose. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure for this course. So similar to our other 5-week-long courses, the format for this one will be that each week there will be a 2-hour live session with Jana. That won't be in Zoom webinar mode, which is what we're in now. That'll actually be in Zoom meeting mode. So you can see the other participants. We do a lot of interactive activities, breakout sessions. We really have designed this to be as much a learning experience as it is a networking experience, and a chance for you to meet and engage with other community builders from around the world. So those classes will take place on Thursdays, and the time of the class will alternate each week between noon to 2 p.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. In addition to the classes, there will also be 2 to 3 bonus sessions, which are part of our normal events program at FIC. But what you get access to is free admission to those events. So you don't have to register for them separately. That's automatically part of what you receive when you sign up for the course. And there's homework assignments. There's a great forum for networking. I'm going to talk about that soon. And dedicated support from our organization. Like, this is the way that we have come up with to best support you in creating more intentional communities, because they're really important. And, if you're somewhere along that journey of thinking of starting a community, maybe already having a forming group together, yes, we want to support you however we can. Here's a quick peek at the course syllabus, and we may be returning back to this. I think Jana will go over this a little bit more in a little bit, but I do want to mention here that all of the classes are recorded, so it's perfectly fine if you can't attend. one or more, you'll get the recording to be able to view afterwards. And I also want to share about this really awesome learning platform that we have been developing. It's a portal that you'll be able to access as a course participant and also as an alumni of any of our courses. So this is where you'll have access to the class materials, the schedule. You'll be able to create a profile for yourself that stays with you even once you become an alumni. And you'll be able to network with other students in the class through a discussion forum, as well as ask Yana questions in between the class. So very excited to be able to offer this. Okay, that's all that I have. So now we'll get ready to open it up to questions. So if you have a question, we'd love for you to ideally raise your hand because we want to hear more voices, or to put your question into this Q&A box. And if you have a general comment or question you'd like to ask to everyone who's listening, you can put that in the chat box. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Yana, so great to have you with us. Thank you for being here. I know you are in the midst of moving, so really appreciate you being here today and also for offering this course.
Yeah, happy to be here. Yeah, this is not where I'll normally be doing the classroom. It'll be from my living room, which is about 20 miles away from here. And I'm in a coffee shop where I'm literally, as Cynthia says, in mid-move and just found a place to be able to get online for an hour. So not our usual setting, but I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, glad you could make it work. All right, so I wonder if you could start off just by sharing a little bit about the course itself and what people can expect to get out of it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing the outline. And so, we go through, so there's 5 sessions and they're broken up into a first session that's really about kind of an overview of what starting an intentional community is all about and talking about like a founder group and what the traits of founders are, and then talking about visioning, which a lot of people are very focused on. Great, thank you, Cynthia, for putting that back up again. A lot of folks are very focused on their vision, and there's certain patterns that work really well for a visioning process and for what's in your visioning document. And then there's certain common mistakes that people make with that. So the first session, we go through kind of the really big picture stuff and the who are you in the process of starting a community. And then the second session is one that is really near and dear to my heart, where we talk about cooperative culture and sort of set a North Star for what we're sort of trying to do with community, not in terms of our specific vision, but in terms of the kind of culture change and social change work that comes along with starting a community. And then talk also about decision making, which is a really key piece. The third session, we get into membership processes, membership structures, and how to recruit people who are really well aligned with what your vision is. Fourth session, we dig into economics and legal structure, which is the stuff that a lot of people really hate thinking about, but it's a really important session when you're at that point in your starting process. It will be the most fascinating thing for about 6 months of your journey, and then you probably won't think about it too much after that, but we will spend a session on that. And then the last session, we talk about property search and basic design parameters for residential intentional communities. And so that's the basic outline, and then you can pull that down, Cynthia. So that's the what we're doing while we're in class time together. And then there's also the sort of how we're delivering that material. And so basically what you're getting is perspective and knowledge from an experienced community founder. Who has also experienced failing, who has both had a failure and then a kind of partial success community and then a really successful community under my belt. And that's given me a lot of perspective on the whole thing and a strong sense of humor about it, because if you're not laughing at yourself, you're probably not going to get very far. But I think one of the most important things is that I've got a really good handle on what you should freak out about and what you should not freak out about. And, I think sometimes groups end up putting a lot of attention and energy into stuff that it's like, actually, you don't need to worry about that, and you can let that unfold. And then there's some pieces that groups really do need to make sure you get it right well ahead of time. And so you're going to get that kind of reality check and useful guideline. You also get a bunch of spreadsheets and worksheets. I love spreadsheets. So you'll be subjected to those, particularly in that fourth session when we get into talking about budgets and legal structure stuff. I think, though, that the most important thing that isn't really about me is just having that cohort of people that you're interacting with who are asking similar questions, who are at a similar place with that journey. And I would really encourage people to not underestimate the power of having a group of people that are in this kind of weird journey together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. Yana, if you could just, when you're speaking, try to hold your microphone up to your mouth. I think that might help a little more.
Okay, is it, you getting background noise?
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry. Like I say, this will not be the normal place where this is happening.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, cool. So I see there are some questions coming in. I just have maybe one more question for you before we jump into the audience questions. Can you share a little bit more about who this course is most ideal for, or what stage in that community building creation process, who would most benefit from this course?
Well, I think really anybody who has decided for sure that they want to start a community, you're going to get something about it, whether you made that decision last week and this is a pretty spontaneous thing, or you've been thinking about it for 10 years and you've already got a group. So I really try to set the course up in such a way that it's going to be valuable for people, whatever founding stage you're at. And it may be that some of that for you is going to be like, oh, well, let's go back and pick up a piece that we missed. And some of that is going to be, oh, now we've got this whole sort of journey that I can outline and lay out before I really put my feet on it. But I also want to say that there's another group of people that I think it's really good for. And that's the person who's like, they don't know if they want to start a community or not. They think they might want to start it, but they don't really know what that means. They don't have a sense of like, well, what is that going to look like? What is my life going to look like for the next, chunk of years if I decide to do that? And so I think it will really help people making a decision about whether starting a community is the right thing for them. And so I try to sort of speak to both of those groups of people. And I think that one of my jobs as somebody who at this point is kind of I guess I'm moving into being a community elder at this point. That's seems weird to say, but I guess that's probably true, is that I want you to be making informed choices about how you relate to intentional communities. And this course is a really good one for asking those right questions and figuring out really how to place yourself within the movement.
Okay, that's super helpful. So people who are like for sure committed to the journey, and people who aren't quite sure but want to know what that journey looks like so they can
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so Bonnie has asked in the Q&A box, how long are the class recordings available? So I think I can answer this one. Bonnie says that they are probably 2 to 3 years out from the heavy work on this. So wondering if it's available longer term. So that's a great question. So the class recordings are available for only 3 weeks after the course finishes, but all of the handouts, all of the spreadsheets, the actual class materials, those are for you to download and have access to whenever you want. But the actual class itself, that recording will only be available for three weeks afterwards. And it is worth mentioning, we are offering this course a few more times this year. So let me see if I can pull up. So the next 2 runs of this course, the starting dates are August 26th and then again on November 18th. So you do have that option to take it later on this year. And I really hope that we're able to offer it the following year in 2022. No guarantees, but that's my hope, if Jana's willing and able. So I hope that helped answer your question, Bonnie.
Yeah, and I would also say that that's a terrific moment to do this, because you will get a sense of like, what am I getting myself into with this, and what do I need to be thinking about? And like, a lot of times people wait to start their learning process until they're actually deep enough in that they've already made some mistakes. And so I would really encourage, Bonnie, and maybe the November course is going to be better timing for you because it will be a little bit closer to that. But I wouldn't, if you're at this place where like you're not that far in yet, it's actually really good timing to go ahead and do it.
Okay, and let's go to someone who has their hand raised so we can hear another voice. Sheila, I see your hand up, so go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could give us an advanced preview of what we should and should not be freaking out about.
Great question.
Yeah, you should. Well, so one of the things is that, so there's a list of a thing that I call 7 things intentional communities always fight about, where and sometimes people panic when those topics come up. And so those are things like, pet policy, cleaning, those kinds of things that are, when you live on your own and you're sort of an independent operator, our culture tells us that stuff is all your personal business. And then you get into community and suddenly it affects other people in a really intense way. And so there's a batch of those topics where I just tell people like, no, just take that as the moment to like, now's the time to actually do the policy work on that. But don't freak out about it. And that's kind of, I sometimes refer to that as the welcome to the human race card for groups, where it's like, nope, you've just hit the real stuff at that point. So there's that chunk of stuff that's the don't freak out about it. I think there's also a chunk of stuff around, there are places where you need people to be really closely aligned in terms of the vision, and there's places that you really don't. And so getting clear about what those things are. And then there's some things that most groups either don't realize they need or don't really want to deal with, and so they don't, which is like things like, how does somebody lose their membership involuntarily? Like if it turns out that things are really not working. And so digging into that stuff before you have a real person who's really not working for the group is one of those things that's like, I don't love teaching that, I don't love thinking about it, and you really need to think about that stuff ahead of time. And so there's a chunk of stuff along those lines that are going to be the things that I'm going to be like, nope, actually freak out about that a little bit, and do it way sooner than you think you're going to need to do it, in order to protect the community and to make sure that people are clear about the fact that, just like a relationship, like you can get a divorce at any time, actually. And so, really thinking through like, what might that look like? So those are some examples of the kinds of things that I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that's a really good segue into the next question, which potentially is something that people would freak out about, which is funding their community. So the question is, are different funding options covered in this course?
Yes, up to a certain point. I mean, this is, so funding is one of those things that really could be an entire 5-week course on its own, but we do spend some time sort of laying out, here's the usual patterns for how funding happens for communities. Sorry, I'm not holding the thing up. Is that better? So we do talk about like, here's the usual patterns, here's where to access that kind of funding, and here's things to think about. One of the topics that is near and dear to my heart is what I call cross-class cooperation. And so, every community that gets off the ground in part gets off the ground because there's somebody with enough class privilege either involved in the project, or that you can access someone or the systems that allow you to access funding. And so we're going to dig into topics that are both about like, how do you deal with banks, but are also like, how do you deal with each other when it comes to financial stuff? And so, so both of those will be covered. Yes.
Great, thank you. And let's go now to another person who has their hand up. Let's go to Angela. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, this is actually Michael, Angela's husband. And we're both very interested in this. It's kind of amazing timing to even learn about this. One of the things that struck me in what you were saying, Vana, was sort of the group aspect of things. And I realized, oh, one of the things that I really get out of is just sort of being around people with sort of a similar vibe and interest. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, because it's not like the average person is interested in this kind of stuff.
Yes, correct.
Right. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh, instead of just running into somebody randomly, somewhere, this is really interesting to me. I was wondering about the class structure, I guess, in the way, like how big is it in a sense that you're aiming for? Because I can see where like more people is like more meeting, but less people is more intimate. And I'm kind of wondering what kind of balance you're doing. And that also relates to how personal it is, whether it's just like, there's 100 people and you don't really get to say anything, or like there's 6 people and you totally get the focus. I'm curious how you're visioning that.
Yeah, I think the course cap is 40. Is that right, Cynthia? Am I remembering that right? Okay, great. So it's 40 people in a cohort, and then every session has 1, 2, sometimes 3 breakout sessions where you're able to have a smaller group conversation, and those small groups are usually between like 3 and 5 people. So you'll be regularly dipping into the smaller groups, and then you can also have conversations directly with people on that online portal that Cynthia showed you. So we really are trying to like strike that balance between like having it be big enough that there's going to be other people in the group who are doing a similar kind of community that you're doing and are thinking about things that are going to like really feel like kindred spirits at an even deeper level, and not being so many people that you don't get that attention. And then you can also use the online portal to ask me questions and get very specific feedback on your documents, or if you have a question that you think is like a weird question, like I'll be able to answer those questions for you directly there. And then there will be times too during the we try to leave time at the end of each session, and sometimes we make it and sometimes we don't, where we just open up the mics and give people a chance to ask the questions directly.
Thank you.
Excellent question, Michael. Great. And let's see here, there's lots of wonderful questions coming in. I think that I'll focus on the ones that are most pertinent to the course itself. A lot of people are asking about their intentional community situation more generally. April writes, "Hi, Yana. I'm wondering if you can speak to what you learned from teaching this course the last time and what's changing this time around, if anything."
That's a great question. So one of the things that has been a trajectory of my work for the last 6 or 7 years has been incorporating more and more social justice values into what I'm doing. And we had a higher percentage of BIPOC folks in this last course. And I feel like I've been working on paying attention to how they're responding to things that I'm talking about, and sort of, tweaking the material as we go along. And I mean, that said, I've been teaching this workshop for about 15 years. And so a lot of this material is stuff that that isn't necessarily, it's my first time through and I'm like just kind of tweaking stuff now. And so I think those are the places where the shifts have been happening gradually. It's just like, let's get really real about talking about how you make communities that actually work for a bigger version of everyone than I think a lot of the material that's out there right now, which is still very put through very white and very middle class filters in a lot of ways. And so I've been working more and more about like, making those filters transparent when they are there, and then getting rid of those filters when I figure out how to get rid of them and actually open the material up more. So I think those are going to be the biggest shifts that I've seen of late.
Yeah, great answer. Okay, let's see. Well, there's a question about examples of intentional community models that may be available to view from the class to help navigate local building codes or ordinances for easier permit approvals. So just in general, will this course focus on getting the community through the building codes and those sort of legal zoning issues?
Generally speaking, no, because it's 10 hours of course material and every jurisdiction is different. And we also are having an increasing number of students, not even from the US in the course, or the US and Canada. And so I can point you toward people that have been through that journey. But this is one of the things. So one of the recommendations that you're going to hear threaded through over and over again is encouraging folks to plant themselves in their community in a place that has already existing communities. And one of the big motivations for it is this piece, is that like, I have no idea how to navigate things in Trenton or Santa Fe or LA because I've never created a community there before. I know the kinds of questions that you need to ask and the kinds of attitudes that work. And so we will talk about it at that level, but it's really, this is one of those places where you most need some actual consulting and direct support, either from communities that have been there already or from professionals in your area. And so I'm not going to be able to help you navigate the stuff directly with your folks, on the ground there, unfortunately, but I can tell you how to approach those conversations.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad that you very clear, Jana, about what you can and can't help with. We do have another online course. I'm going to put the link in the chat. It's called Legal Basics for Forming Communities, and that's with Clifford Pollen. He is a lawyer who works with intentional communities specifically. He's based in California, so as Jana said, like all of these things are so locally specific, but I think that course will give you more of an overview of specifically zoning, permitting, legal structures, anything in that realm. That course might be a better fit. Okay. And let's see here. I'd love if people would like to raise their hands so they can ask their questions out loud. We'd love to hear some more voices. Yeah, I see the comment in the chat also about the people behind you, Jana, and maybe shifting. Yeah, it's sort of, you can't, yeah, that's a little better. We see more of a tree. That's great. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see. Sheila has another question. So we'll go to Sheila's question and then we'll go back to the questions in the Q&A box. All right. So go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm pretty much at the beginning phase of thinking about this. It was actually suggested to me by another person and I'm looking into it. But how absorbing or time consuming would you say the process is? Is it going to be like a full-time job to try to get a community off the ground? And for how, if it is like a full-time job, how long would it be, that level of like intensity? Because it's sounding to me like it's almost like you're creating a little, you're creating a little civilization that's going to require social rules and legal rules and it's going to, I think, require quite a lot. Yeah. Is my guess.
Yeah, it
so I'm also starting a business at the same time. So I'm wondering, would I be taking on too much?
Well, you are, if it's just you are absolutely taking on too much. I mean, what you're going to want to do is put together a small core group of people who have, generally speaking, I'd say between 2 and 10 hours a week to put into it. And this process takes anywhere from 2 to 7 years to actually get you on your property. And so that's the kind of time commitment that I see. And you are going to need a few people who are sometimes referred to as burning souls, who are like, they're going to obsess about this. They're going to make this a really central thing. in their lives. And often that's the people who show up in these courses are like, you know, you're deeply passionate about this. That passion is going to motivate you working through this process over a period of time. But it is not a full-time job. It might be too much though, if you're trying to start a business and start a community at the same time. I mean, I say sometimes that starting a community is a little bit like starting a small business, a nonprofit, getting married, because there's a whole bunch of social dynamics involved with that, and doing a really intense personal growth course simultaneously with the same small group of people. And so that might be a little bit much, but if you have like 3 or 4 other companions who are doing that with you, then it's not going to be too much. So, so that answer is like highly, it depends on your exact circumstances and how much you're actually creating a core group versus, you know, sort of you're the only one thinking about this right now. It's going to be really overwhelming if you're the only one.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
You will notice that I don't sugarcoat things generally. Like I'm going to like tell you what the actual thing is. And I feel like that's an obligation as somebody who really cares about this movement and cares about communities getting off the ground. But I'm not going to be like, oh no, sure, you're going to be fine. If like, no, you're not going to be fine.
Yep. Tell it as it is. Good. All right, we have some interesting questions in the Q&A box. So first question, seems like most community members are leftist or leaning heavily left. Are you familiar with communities that do not lean that way, excepting religious communities?
Gosh, as a leftist, I would love it if that was actually true. I don't think that that's true. I mean, I think that there's communities across the political spectrum. I mean, basically, if you can imagine a life philosophy and orientation, somebody has created a community around that thing at some point. And so, you know, there are, you know, very right-leaning communities out there and very left-leaning communities. Most of them, though, you know, I would say a lot of the communities that, for people that end up coming to these courses are sort of middle of the road liberal, I'd say is pretty common. But I don't think that's because those other communities don't exist. I think that that's the folks who tend to like take online courses, I think are more in that zone. But I don't think that's something inherent about the nature of intentional communities. I will say that there are cultural orientations that work really well for community that that may not be a good fit for certain super right political orientations that I'm going to recommend because they're how you actually have communities that are more egalitarian, which are the ones that I think I want to be supporting. And so I'm going to make recommendations that probably are going to be an uncomfortable cultural fit for somebody who leans super right. Yeah, so I'm not sure that was the most coherent answer I've ever given to something, but yeah, go ahead and ask a follow-up if I'm not getting at what you were wanting me to answer.
Mm-hmm. Or feel free to raise your hand and ask your question verbally as well. Sometimes it's helpful. Okay. And now we have 2 questions that are very much related to diversity and inclusion, but in different opposite ways almost. So the first question, if one is interested in forming a faith-based intentional community, will content be relevant or in tension with those organizing principles priorities? EI, shared beliefs rather than inclusivity, other groups might value. So I think how to maybe be creating a community, whether it's faith-based or something else that is a little exclusionary, a little focused on something in particular.
Yeah. So this absolutely works for faith-based communities. One of the things that we'll do in that first session is talk about vision, and I have this series of spectrums that every community falls on, and one of those spectrums is about you know, religious and spiritual orientation to the community. And so I don't think there's anything that I'm going to talk about that wouldn't work for a faith-based community. And in fact, I've worked with a number of faith-based communities. And so I think that that's totally fine. And every community makes choices about how to be inclusive and how to be exclusive. And so we'll dig into talking about what diversity really means. And so I think that the places that you want to be exclusive are the ones that are about whether the person who wants to come in is a values matched, who is on board with whatever your community vision is. And so it's totally fine to have a community that, you know, is like, you have to be a little bit tricky with the language in terms of like legal restrictions on protected categories, which are there for good reasons and sometimes make it a little bit tricky. But I have a group that I've been working with that is, it's a Jewish community, and the way that they have worked with it is they basically say, like, this is a community that is for people who want to live in a community centered on Jewish practices, and you don't have to be a Jew to be part of it. But they have found ways to talk about that. And so we'll talk about how do you work that line in a way that builds the kind of community that you're wanting to build, but is not discriminatory and isn't discriminating unconsciously based on things that we don't want to be discriminating on the basis of. And so we're going to talk about how to work that line.
Great. Awesome. Okay, and then the other question related to diversity. I think from reading this, this person is trying to decide whether to take your course, Yana, or perhaps Crystal's course on building a diverse and inclusive community. Trying to decide, and if we are, one, not yet finding the diversity we envision, how do you address the various minority perspectives? And two, will you mention possibilities in other countries, such as Latin America, for more untraditional Latinx new families? So
there's multiple layers in there. I mean, I think Crystal's course is fantastic. And so I encourage all groups to at some point also take Crystal's course. I think that she's very good about, she and I have similar orientations, that we're both very frank about stuff and very direct about stuff, and are going to lay things out in a practical way, but not really pull any punches about, yeah, you actually need to be doing this work. So I'd say pick one to do first. I don't know that there's a sequence to it that makes more or less sense. If that's your biggest question right now, I would probably say start with Crystal's course and then loop back around to me. But it covers really different material. I mean, Crystal's course is really focused primarily on the diversity stuff. I'm about, here's the nuts and bolts and the sort of big picture things that every community is going to need to think about. And so I think that they're both really valuable. And again, if you can't afford both of them, please apply for a scholarship and pair these two things together, because I think they're both really needed. And so I don't actually know a ton about the Latin American scene and how it does or doesn't like serve better for Latinx families. And so that's something that I would be delighted to have you bring into the course space if you're asking those questions, and have us do some of that learning together possibly. I am going to talk about ways that we want all of our communities to be doing anti-oppression work, because if you say that we're an inclusive community and you're not doing that work, you're not going to be an inclusive community. And so I really want to encourage that kind of work being part and parcel of what we're doing, right alongside the financial planning and the land search and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if I hit did I hit all of the pieces of that?
I think so.
Okay, great, good.
Yeah, great. Okay. And it looks like Deanna Price, you've had your hand up for a while, so thank you for your patience. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, yes. Do you know of any class that talks about different financial options for communities and all the different phases of growth? I've been looking at all the different associations and even looked at Wolf recently to see what options are available for even traveling and visiting different communities. Do you know of a class that talks about different options for financing?
Well, we'll talk about it a little bit, in context of being like, one of sort of 10 major pieces that we cover over the course of the 5 weeks. I don't know of an assistance program of some kind for visiting communities other than getting some kind of a personal loan for that. And Cynthia might know something that I don't know, but I'm not currently familiar with something along those lines. I do know people who focus more on that piece that I can recommend to you, but I don't really know of a whole course. I think this is a missing piece right now, actually, um, in the batch of stuff that's available to people as like full-on courses and help with that. I mean, I'm going to help you with figuring out budgeting, which is a precursor to doing any kind of financing. And I'm going to help you think through, what the different components might be and what connections you have that might make financing easier. But, this is a little bit like the legal structures question of like banks in California are pretty different from banks in Nebraska when it comes to this stuff. And so there's a local specificity piece to this one as well.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Okay. You said that this is a missing piece. I'm very interested in this aspect because it is my background. And if you can send me any information referencing associations that may have some kind of course or whatever, I will be traveling, visiting many different communities in the next 9 months. I'm a former Finhorn member, and I'm just really looking for that niche where my small group of people can really be of service. So I just wanted to ask the question. I know on 2 Zooms that I've recently been on, they were both couched as being very aggressive or very optimistic, in their initial stages. They do own the land, but then, one of them has the housing starting at 650,000. Well, that knocks a lot of people out of the ball game.
Yep.
So there's a lot of aspects of grants and scholarships, and of course there was numerous pieces in place at Finhorn. So I would like to just keep the dialogue going, because if that is a niche that needs to be filled, perhaps myself as well as other people on your calls in the future might be able to create something that is very viable for everyone.
Yeah, I think that could be really great. And I do talk about ways to structure community to be more financially accessible. I mean, I identify as being working class myself, and many versions of community are not accessible to somebody like me. And so we're going to get in there and talk about how to structure a community in such a way that makes it more accessible and makes it so that different ways of contributing that aren't just about dollars that you have saved up from some high-end job over the years, how to structure community to make it as accessible as possible. The part that I am less able to help with is the how you get outside financing from the capitalist system. I think that's just a really hard hoe at this point. So I won't be as helpful with that, but absolutely we will talk about accessibility issues and economics internally with community. And thank you. I mean, I think that'd be great. I mean, the more people who can fill some of these niches and help us build collective knowledge about this stuff, the better. We're a very dynamic movement that I think is trying right now to learn as much as we can about ourselves and about the context that we find ourselves in. So, please do build that knowledge and build those resources and share with others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great inspiration for more courses we can offer. Yeah, or even more possibilities for directly funding intentional communities would be great to do too. All right, and let's go now to Paul. Paul has their hand up. Go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to find out the best course for working sort of in reverse, owning the land, being from the property development world as a contractor, and trying to just take the right steps to make sure those fall within those local zoning ordinances. So things I need to do now. It's like I said, sort of working in reverse, figure out what structure, what model to kind of use as a template.
Great. Paul, many people come into the course already owning land and are trying to figure out how to do that and how to really turn it into a community. And so I will absolutely talk about that scenario and what my recommendations are for how to move from being a single person owning the property to, collective ownership and actually really being able to create community. So, so this could be that course if, the other things that I'm talking about make sense to you.
They do. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay. So many excellent questions. Thank you all for asking your questions and being here and being really curious about starting a community. Another kind of context, big thing of the moment. Jana, will you address climate change and the impacts of this reality in regards to creating a community on a piece of land, no matter where, as this affects this global reality?
Well, so two answers to that. One is I've actually written a book about intentional communities and climate change called Together Resilient. And so I have a book's worth of things to say on that, which again doesn't fit within a 10-hour course. So I'd encourage you to go ahead and get that book if that's one of the things that's really driving you. We will talk a little bit about that, but because I have work sort of in other areas on that topic, I don't spend a ton of time on it here. But I absolutely, when we get into talking about property criteria, climate disruption is one of those things that I have on that list and that we will talk about within that context. So I'm glad that you're thinking about that. I have a couple clients that I really, really, really wish were not planting themselves where they are, because I don't think their property will be there in 20 years. And so, I think getting really real about some of those topics is a really important thing to do as a founder or a founding group. And, again, it's going to be one small piece of what we're talking about in this particular course.
Okay, another question for you. If the journey is 2 to 10 hours per week for 2 to 7 years, is there a self-assessment checklist you would advise people take beforehand so they can opt out if they're romanticizing the magnitude of the undertaking?
Well, I spend a lot of time, particularly at the front end of this course. I'm a little infamous for kind of trying to talk people out of this initially and saying, like, let's get really real about this. Let's get really real about this. Let's get really real about this. And here's the traits of founders and what are you good at and what are you not? And so, yes, the first part of the course will very much speak to that. And then I think, if people don't eliminate themselves at that point, then I think my job is to give you as much as I can to actually have it go well. And for you to be able to grow into being the person who you need to be in order to start a community. And the good thing about it being a 2 to 7 year journey is that there is that space to grow and to learn what you need to learn and to, become the person, and ideally people, because you'll ideally have a small group of people who are really going to be able to do that process well. But yes, there will definitely be some real talk at the front end about whether you specifically should be doing this specific thing.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. So if there are more questions out there, we'd really love to hear them. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to share your question out loud or put them in the Q&A box. And as we transition towards wrapping up, I wonder, Jana, if there is any overarching or big piece of advice you'd like to give to people, maybe sparked by some of the things that you've heard thus far, or just, like what advice could you give to someone who may or may not take your course, but who is thinking of starting an intentional community?
Yeah, well, I think there's the perpetual learn from the pain of your elders. Just to really talk to people who have been founders, and whether that's taking this course with me, it isn't that interesting to me, but whoever you have access to who have been through this journey, to really listen to their stories and take into account what they've been through and what they've learned. And I think the biggest piece that I pass along when people bring that to me is that every intentional community is culture change work. I mean, we, at least in North America, we have been raised in the most competitive, individualistic culture that there is in the world. And that means that we are not trained to do cooperation well. And so recognizing that, this is going to change you, and that you're going to have to think about culture in different ways from how you normally think about it, and that there's going to be bumps along that road, and to really embrace this not just as a, okay, we're getting property and we're doing budgeting and we're, we're a bunch of people who like each other, yay, but actually like, oh, and there is going to be this culture change piece as well, and like really being mindful about that from the beginning is probably the number one thing that I think groups typically don't do, and is the number one reason why groups fail, even if they get off the ground, why they don't last. And so really taking that part as seriously as you're taking all of these other parts.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's many, many more people at this stage that some of you are probably at, of like thinking and dreaming of creating community. But unfortunately, too many communities that fail early on in the process. So we're all about increasing that success percentage rate. And there's an awesome question about this course and the other courses that the FIC is offering and the differences amongst them. So I'm actually thinking that I can share my screen briefly and just show you the other courses that we're offering and talk about how they're different from each other in particular. That's a really wonderful question. So I'm on the learn.ic.org page, and these are the 3 courses that are starting very soon in the first week of June. And we are offering the Starting an Intentional Community course as the foundational level course for someone who wants to start intentional community. This one's going to be the most broad in terms of the scope of what's covered, and also in some ways the most basic, the most designed for people who are really at that initial stage of getting started. Other courses for people who want to start a community include the Building Diverse and Inclusive Communities course. But as Jana mentioned, that's going to be different content than what's in the Starting a Community course. It's going to be much more focused on social justice, on looking at the different types of diversity, gender, sexuality, neurodiversity, a whole bunch of things, and really looking at community through those particular lenses. Also for community starters, the legal basics for forming communities, that could also be a really good one, because oftentimes what we're noticing is the legal hurdles, the zoning hurdles are one of those big stumbling blocks for new communities. And also creating an affordable co-housing community. If you're really into the co-housing model in particular, this one offered with Charles Durrett is fabulous, because he's really been one of the pioneers who brought the co-housing concept to the United States, along with Katie McCannett. So that's really one for those of you who are into co-housing in particular. And then these 2, like working constructively with conflict and facilitation, those are 2 skill sets that you're really going to want to have well honed as a leader in your community, because conflict's going to happen and you're going to have a lot of meetings you're going to need to facilitate. So and then these other 2, the Finding Community course, which is the course that I teach, as well as the Thriving in Community. Those are 2 of our courses that are geared more towards people who don't want to start a community per se, but are more interested in joining a community. So the Finding Community course offers a lot of advice on how do you do your research, visit communities, and ultimately join one. And then part 2 for Thriving in Community, how do you adjust to this new culture? How do you really live in cooperative culture with all of these meetings, maybe different ways of relating that are different than what you grew up in? So yeah, so that's the little overview of the courses that we offer. But again, this one in particular is that foundational level one for starting a community. Okay. Dana, is there anything you'd like to add about how this course might be different or similar?
No, I think that that's pretty good. I mean, this is really specifically the thing that I think, as you say, is kind of the core course for folks who are wanting to be founders. I also wonder if you want to mention, and I don't actually know what's queued up right now, but that not everything is a 5-week course. I mean, we do sometimes offer shorter one-off courses. So maybe just like pay attention to the FIC website and see what pops up where you might be able to get like a 2-hour, quick look into one of these other pieces and not necessarily have to do the whole 5 weeks. Oh, there we go. So we're gonna.
I'll share my screen.
How to navigate that.
Yeah, let's just walk everyone through the website, because this was a question that had come up in our last session, how to find our events. So if you go under Connect, this is where you'll see the events page. And like Yana said, we're offering weekly all kinds of events. They're all either free or offered on a sliding scale starting at $10. So you can see upcoming in June, we have one on housing policies affecting the diversity of intentional communities. Our virtual tour of intentional communities is coming up pretty soon. So yeah, like Yana said, if you're not ready to take a 5-week long course, there's definitely some ways to dip your toes in. Good. All right, so we have a hand up from April. This might be one of the last questions. April, go ahead.
Hi. Well, okay, I'd like to offer a little appreciation to both of you for doing this, and to Cynthia and FIC for offering the discount. That helped make the decision that it's possible for me. So thank you for that. And thank you, Yana, for offering this course. And my question, so I'm kind of the main organizer of an intentional community that's being birthed. And something that I'm curious about whether Yana might be speaking to is like power differentials in community, maybe the founders versus the non-founders, or people with wealth disparity who, have more money to put towards land and who don't. Just wondering if you have any insight on that, or if that will be part of this course.
Yeah, there's actually a section on founder syndrome, as it is sometimes called, and where that comes from and why it's double-edged swords, like a whole bunch of dynamics around founders. There's a whole section on privilege in general and talking about how every decision that we make privileges someone or something. There's a bunch of stuff on like wealth disparities and how to navigate that, both in terms of community structure and in terms of financing. And so, yes, all of those are going to be direct things that we're going to talk about. And I also find myself frequently bringing in racism conversations in like sort of bits and pieces. And so I'm going to thread those kinds of differentials and power dynamics through a bunch of conversations. And then there's occasional times where we'll lean directly into one of them that's appropriate to the specific topic of the week. So absolutely.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, me too.
Good, excited to have you join, April. And let's see, all right, there's one more question I want to touch on before we wrap up. Sheila asks, do members of the class stay in touch after the class is over, or is it possible for them to do so? And the answer is yes, they definitely stay in touch with each other. That's one of the things that we're continuing to ideate on, how we can foster even more engagement among students after the course is over. So right now, the main way that this is happening, I'll share my screen one more time. This is kind of fun to show you into the back end. So this is the learning portal that I spoke about earlier on. And there's this discussion groups space. So my courses where you see the courses you're taking, but then if you go to the discussion group space, this is where you have access to join the original discussion group that your cohort created together. So all of those conversation topics. So you can communicate with your cohort, as well as we have a whole discussion space set up for anyone and everyone who's ever taken an FIC course in the All Courses alumni. And currently there's over 200 people who are part of that discussion space. So this is a group of people who have, similar to you, gone through some type of learning experience offered by FIC and are really like gung-ho excited about intentional communities. So
Cynthia, before you stop screen sharing, can you go over to the Cooperative Culture Handbook for a second? Because there's a question in the chat that I don't really have time to answer about what skills I work with groups around culture shift, but there's a book. So the other book that of mine that FIC published was created with Karen Gibnig, who's another person who's got community experience. And so there are 52 exercises and 26 what we call culture keys, where we broke down a particular piece of mainstream North American culture and then talk about reactions to it and talk about like balanced expressions on that sort of thread. And so this is my brain dump around culture stuff, and also has a ton of talk about skills and tools in it. So that is my non-answer to that question is go ahead and get the book. And I will reference this during the course as well. And we'll talk very briefly about what I mean by cooperative culture during the course. Thanks, Cynthia.
yeah, sure thing. And I'll put this link into the chat for everyone as well. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, well, that's it. We are at time. Thank you everyone so much for those wonderful questions and for being here, for being on this journey. I hope to see some of you with Jana on the course. And Jana, thank you also for your time during a busy day for you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Looking forward to meeting a bunch of you in a a more direct setting very soon. So thanks. Looking forward to it.
Okay, and everyone be on the lookout for your email with your unique discount code to get the 30% off. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.